Air India 171 just made history for all the wrong reasons. Right after takeoff, both engines failed, and now the Wall Street Journal is reporting the fuel cutoff switches were literally set to cut off mid-air. But how did things go from a normal takeoff to complete engine failure in just 6 seconds? Let's rewind the clock and break it all down. At 1:39 p.m., the pilots declared a mayday. That is the universal distress signal for aircraft emergencies. They knew something had gone terribly wrong. But what made things even scarier was what was recorded inside the cockpit. According to the black box voice recorder, one of the pilots suddenly shouted, "Why did you cut off the fuel?" And the other pilot immediately responded, "I didn't do it." This shows that both of them were just as shocked as anyone else. Now, investigators found that both fuel cutoff switches were in the cutoff position. Basically, fuel to the engines had been manually stopped. So now we know when it all happened. But what actually caused those engines to stop? Let's look at the part of the plane that might be hiding the biggest secret, the fuel cutoff switches. Inside the cockpit of a Boeing 787, there are two fuel control switches, one for each engine. These switches have two main positions, run and cutoff. When the switch is in the run position, fuel flows to the engine, allowing it to operate normally. When it's flipped to cutoff, it stops the fuel from reaching the engine, basically shutting it down. These switches are super important but are not meant to be used during takeoff or while flying. They are mainly there for ground procedures, like shutting down the engines after landing, or during emergencies like a fire or engine failure. Now here's the thing, these switches are designed in a way that makes it really hard to flip them accidentally. They're guarded with a cover or a lock, so pilots have to deliberately lift and flip them. It is not something that just happens with a bump to the elbow or by mistake. So the big question is, how did both switches on Air India 171 end up in the cutoff position right after takeoff? This brings us to something even more worrying. According to a 2018 FAA bulletin, there were already concerns about similar switches on other Boeing planes like the 737. The FAA had flagged that in rare cases, certain engine switches could behave weirdly or become too easy to move. But sadly, these warnings were never applied to the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which is the aircraft involved in the Air India 171 crash. Even though the same basic principles design apply, no one thought to check if the Dreamliner had the same risk. The Wall Street Journal and The Sun both reported that this Dreamliner had never undergone an inspection for this issue, despite the 2018 warning. That is a huge oversight. To investigate further, Air India did something smart. They ran simulator tests using the exact same model of aircraft. Experienced Air India pilots recreated the same takeoff sequence to see if something like this could happen naturally. From what's been published in the Times of India and Wikipedia, the results were weird. There was not a clear system failure, but strange behaviors did show up, especially during simulated electrical failures. Certain warnings were not triggering the way they should have, and in some runs, systems became unresponsive for brief moments, just like what could have happened on the Air India 171. Okay, the switches were suspicious, but what about the humans in charge of them? Were the pilots calm or completely caught off guard? What happened inside the cockpit might shock you. On Air India Flight 171, the captain was Sumit Sabharwal, a 56-year-old pilot with a long and experienced career. He had over 15,600 flying hours, which is a huge number. That means he's seen all kinds of situations and flown for decades. Sitting next to him was the first officer Clive Kunder, who was 32 years old and had around 3,400 flight hours. He was not new, but he was not super experienced either. On this flight, Clive was the pilot flying, while Captain Sabharwal was in charge of monitoring and handling any issues. Basically, one was steering the plane and the other was managing everything else. Now let's think about what it feels like during a takeoff. You have to be 100% focused. Everything happens super fast. Engine readings, speed checks, weather, radio communication, and so on. It is a high-pressure moment, especially in a big plane like the Boeing 787. Even a small distraction can throw things off. So imagine being in that cockpit and suddenly seeing both engines lose power just 6 seconds after takeoff. That is not something any pilot trains for on a daily basis. And in those few seconds, they had to figure out what happened, try to restart the engines, and stay calm. That is a huge amount of pressure. On Reddit, some users who are either in aviation or follow it closely pointed out something important: the mental health and stress levels of airline crew. One user wrote, he also talks about the mental bit of the stressful life in aviation, referring to how hard it is for pilots to stay mentally fresh all the time. You have odd work hours, long flights, pressure to avoid mistakes, and sometimes even personal stuff on your mind. It's easy to say pilots should always be alert, but these are humans, not robots. Even the most experienced pilots can have off days, especially under sudden, chaotic situations like this. Also, remember that when both engines failed, the cockpit would have gone dark, alarms would have started blaring, the lights would have flickered, and the controls might have gone stiff. It was not a calm environment where you could think clearly. Add to that the fact that the plane was climbing, and they had no time or height to recover, and you can see how hard it must have been for them to make decisions in that moment. And just when you think that it could not get any worse, wait until you hear what the families are saying. The outrage, the lawsuits, and the silence from the top. And then the preliminary report came out, and it only made things more confusing. Many families of the victims spoke out in frustration. They felt the report was too vague and didn't clearly explain what went wrong. Some even said that it looked like a cover-up. According to The Guardian and The Sun, families are heartbroken and angry. One mother who lost her son said, "They are hiding the truth from us. We deserve to know what happened inside that cockpit." For them, it is not just about technical terms or aviation systems, it's about closure. They want someone to take responsibility. But it's not just the families. Even pilots and aviation experts are raising concerns. Several pilot unions and individual aviators have said that the report leaves too many unanswered questions, especially about the fuel cutoff switches. They believe the focus should be on how and why both switches ended up in the off position. Pilots say that this shouldn't be possible without a deliberate move, and if it was not intentional, then maybe there's a deeper system issue that needs urgent attention. One veteran pilot told The Sun, "Until they explain how those switches moved, we're all flying blind." Meanwhile, all the big names in aviation are now involved in the investigation. Boeing, which built the plane, GE, which made the engines, and major regulators like the FAA and NTSB are all part of the ongoing probe. But here is the catch: no one has taken the blame yet. Boeing says they are cooperating fully. GE is doing internal checks. The FAA says they're waiting for the full data before making a decision, and the NTSB has stayed quiet so far. So right now everyone's pointing fingers, but no one is stepping forward. Air India, on the other hand, had no choice but to act. The airline faced massive public backlash after the crash. According to The Times, there have been multiple resignations from senior staff, and the flight number AI-171 has now been retired and replaced, which is something airlines usually do after a major tragedy. They also promised to review their training procedures and safety checks, but many people say it's too little, too late. On the legal side, there is a storm brewing. Experts are saying that Boeing could face lawsuits if it turns out the switch design was faulty. Some lawyers are already preparing cases, claiming that Boeing did not do enough to prevent this kind of disaster, even after the 2018 FAA bulletin that warned about similar issues. If they can prove that the design allowed accidental movement or that safety inspections were skipped, Boeing could end up paying millions in damages. Right now, the most important thing everyone's waiting for is a final report from the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau of India. According to The Times, Reuters, and Wikipedia, that report is expected to come out by the end of 2025. It will be way more detailed than the preliminary one and should explain exactly what caused the crash, step by step. One major part of the report will be the full analysis of the cockpit voice recorder. This black box captures everything the pilot said and heard in the final moments of the flight. So far, we only know about one chilling quote: "Why did you cut off the fuel?" But there's a lot more in there. Investigators are still listening, decoding, and matching those sounds to what was happening in the cockpit. They're also checking for background noises, system alerts, and any warning signals that might have gone off. Another thing still being tested is the fuel switch assemblies themselves. Investigators want to know if the switches had any mechanical defects, like loose guards or faulty wires. They are doing forensic tests to see if anything broke, jammed, or moved on its own. If they find out that the switches were damaged or poorly designed, it could shift the blame toward Boeing or the parts manufacturer. And then there's the full black box data from the flight data recorder, which logs everything from engine power and speed to pressure and altitude. By comparing this data with the voice recordings, experts can rebuild the exact timeline of what happened in those final seconds. It's like putting together pieces of a puzzle to find the truth. Globally, this crash has already set off warning bells. Airlines that fly the Boeing 787 Dreamliner have quietly started checking their own aircraft for fuel switch issues. And if the final AAIB report confirms that the design played a role, the FAA might issue an airworthiness directive, a rule that forces all 787 operators to fix the issue or upgrade the switches. So even though the crash happened in India, its effects could ripple across the entire aviation industry. People online began trending hashtags like boycott Air India, and public trust in the airline dropped. According to market watchers, the company had to spend millions on immediate damage control, including changing the flight number, grounding part of their 787 fleet, and launching extra training programs for their staff. All of this costs money, and a lot of it. And then there is the insurance angle. After a crash, huge payouts are triggered, covering compensation to victims' families, aircraft value loss, investigation costs, and legal fees. The insurance companies that cover Boeing, Air India, and even third-party parts manufacturers are now facing millions, possibly billions in liability. Depending on what the final report says, the blame could shift, and whoever is held responsible will have to pay up big time. And let's not forget the global aviation industry. After news of the crash spread, several airlines that operate Boeing 787s started receiving questions from passengers. Some even canceled bookings out of fear. That's how big the psychological impact is. Even though flying is still statistically safe, when something like this happens, people remember it. For the average flyer, it does not matter if the odds are 1 in a million, they just want to feel safe. This crash also put pressure on airplane manufacturers worldwide, not just Boeing. Airbus, Embraer, and others are now reviewing their own safety systems, knowing that one mistake, even one switch, can destroy a company's reputation overnight. Governments and regulators are expected to tighten rules, increase audits, and possibly raise insurance costs for aircraft that haven't been upgraded. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell because when the final AAIB report drops, we're coming back with a full breakdown.